My name is Robert Cuffley, and together with screenwriter Susie Maloney, we wrote a film called Inhabit. Inhabit is about a psychotherapist named Gordon Calloway, who is kidnapped and imprisoned by one of his patients, Audrey Wells. Audrey claims that she's hearing the voice of her dead mother in her head, and that no one has been able to help her. And so Gordon, a man of science, must convince Audrey that what she hears in her head could be the onset of mental illness. But is it? As the movie progresses, and as Gordon and Audrey begin their descent into madness, we learn that Audrey's affliction is more supernatural than psychiatric. Okay, so why this story? I'd been thinking about science and how, yeah, it's wonderful, but it's also kind of ruined everything. Things like the chill-inducing Sasquatch footage that mesmerized and terrified me as a kid. Debunked. The Loch Ness Monster? Debunked. But what happens if there is no explanation? What happens if a man of science confronts something that he cannot explain? I was raised in a church by a Mennonite mother, and suffice to say, as much as I wanted to watch a horror movie, it was completely out of the question. It turns out I didn't need horror movies because when I was 10, this man, Bob Larson, a self-described demonologist, scared the living crap out of me. He spoke at a church I went to and essentially convinced me that evil is everywhere, and that we must fight on a daily basis the demonic forces around us. The devil was in Elvis Presley, the devil was in the Eagles, as well as most popular movies, including Star Wars. Bob Larson scared me so much that I even agreed to throw out my coveted Darth Vader mask that I'd saved up my paper route money to buy. But by the time Bob Larson's warning of evil began to wane, I dove headfirst into horror, and managed probably around the age of 12 or 13 to see a lot of horror movies. Some are easy come, easy go, most actually, but those concerning possession, supernatural forces, the paranormal, they tended to stay with me. Captivity is a theme that runs through Inhabit. Gordon is a captive of Audrey. Audrey is a captive of whatever it is inside her head. Even Victoria is a captive of her wheelchair. I've dealt with captivity before, particularly with Ferocious.
Get off my leg now.
And even earlier with Walk All Over Me. There are many films featuring captivity, both good and bad, where the main character, the protagonist, must free themselves from being imprisoned. We root for them, and are given many reasons to despise and fear their captors.
Mister, my family will pay cash. Whatever ransom you're asking for, they'll pay it.
But one of the things that makes Inhabit unique is that our sole focus is not entirely on Gordon, the man imprisoned against his will, but also on Audrey, who is struggling against something growing inside of her. I want the pain of Audrey searching for a diagnosis of something we know is real, but something that the medical community has dismissed. When Audrey brings Gordon to her house, it's only because she's tried absolutely everything. And herein we have the gaslighting element, which was first spawned by an article I read where women were being less believed, their pain thought less of, their concerns more likely to be deemed hysteric than men when it came to their doctors. The point being that Audrey has tried everything up until this point, and that the act of kidnapping Gordon is an act of desperation, not cruelty. To lure Gordon, Audrey has to pretend to be something she is not, before she becomes something she is not. But rather than paint Audrey as sinister or misguided or even mentally ill, I want to treat Audrey empathetically, because she too is a victim. In fact, she and Gordon face a common enemy. Victoria, Gordon's late wife. As an adult and as a filmmaker, I've identified the aspects of horror that work best on me. And I will definitely be pushing those same buttons when making Inhabit. Within horror, there's of course the tendency for fast-cut jump scares and the like, but stillness is something that's always worked on me as an audience member. Not something that jumps out at you, but perhaps something that you see in normal circumstances.
among the porcelain, among some
If handled properly, there can be an unbearable tension in silence, and the absence of action can be terrifying.
with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll.
I use this briefly in Penny Whistle, a short film I just made that premiered at the Telluride Horror Fest. In terms of proximity, we don't always have the ability to scrutinize. With Inhabit, we will not see everything in close-up. We'll see things from a far-away perspective where details are sometimes scarce. And if your mind is like mine, you'll probably assume the worst. What you can't see in detail, your mind can fill in with sound. I'm particularly drawn to movies where the score and the sound design become one, where it's impossible to tell where the score ends and the sound design begins. I'm a fan of room tones being embedded into the soundtrack. If you lay a drone or a room tone in your soundtrack at 18 or 19 hertz, which is below the level of human hearing, it remains detectable enough to build a sense of considerable unease. Again, I use this in Penny Whistle, where I created a distant hum by modulating 3 air conditioners together. It ended up creating a distant, unsettling rumble. Worth mentioning is a cinematic device that I will be using during the hypnosis sequences, where Gordon will appear beside Audrey in whatever tranquil, meditative environment he asks her to picture herself in. You can see an example of this here in the fantastic film The Dead Zone. This device has the added benefit of getting us, the audience, out of the soul room that Gordon is imprisoned inside of through so much of the film. Now, the ending has been called a big twist that people seem to like. I like to think of it as a representation of the complexity of human behavior. In any case, the ending seems apropos given the age we live in. Think of Bill Cosby or Kevin Spacey, where no matter what the stature, no matter what the lifelong reputation, it can always come crumbling down in an instant, as it does in Inhabit in the film's closing minutes. Endings are not always wrapped up. The monster, quote unquote, has not been caught. Nor has it been killed. It's only been delayed.